A short while ago, I did a video talking about how we can get true stereo out of using a Helix preset, even when wanting to put stereo effects before an amp. The thing, as I mentioned in that video, about a piece of hardware like the Helix is it's a very flexible unit with lots of options, but just the fact that it has so many options actually can make it quite difficult to use for some who don't understand how it all works. That sparked a lot of other questions that I received about that video and made me realize that a lot of folks might be confused about how the paths and the routing work in the Helix preset. And are we actually getting stereo? Are we actually getting dual mono, or are we actually getting mono? And what are all those things? So today I'm going to cut through a lot of the confusion and hopefully get you to be able to realize the full potential of your Helix and utilizing all the great, wonderful abilities that it has. So let's head over to Cubase and HX Edit, and I'm going to show you a little bit about how all of this works. All right, so here we are over in both HX Edit and Cubase Pro. A little bit of a different layout than anybody who usually watch my videos. And over here in Cubase, I have a little project set up. I'll explain exactly how I have this set up in just a moment. And over here, I have a very simple preset, if I'll even call it that. This is just more to show you different routing possibilities. So we're going to get to both of these. Now let's head over to Cubase, and I'm going to show you exactly what I have set up here. So if I hit F4, I can drag the audio connections onto the screen. What I've done is I've set up a bunch of inputs to go into Cubase out of Helix, since I'm using my Helix as the audio interface. I have USB 1, USB 2, all the way up to 6. I have another input called Guitar Reamp, another one called Mic Pre-DI, and those are all mono inputs, as you can see. And then down here, I actually have 3 stereo inputs, USB 1, 2. So you'll notice they're taking the input of 1 and 2 and combining it onto one stereo track. USB 3, 4, and 5, 6 doing the same thing with their outputs off of our Helix. So this gives us almost all the options we can utilize when using Helix as an audio interface. So what I've done is I've assigned those over to these tracks. You'll notice here I have USB 1 all the way through 6, which are mono tracks, and you can tell that by the single circle right here. As we go down here, you'll notice I have stereo tracks with the dual circle, the double circle, and that's USB 1, 2 combined in a stereo track through 3, 4, 5, 6. And then I have one labeled Guitar DI. So what that's going to tell us is these different tracks are going to accept different parts of the signal coming out of the Helix. So coming over to the Helix now, we're going to start over here on the left. And this is a very important block because this is going to tell us what is going to be feeding the signal through onto this path. Now keep something in mind. These paths are stereo paths. Just because they're stereo paths does not mean they have to be used as stereo paths. They could be used as mono paths. They could be used as dual mono paths, meaning we're sending different signals to the one output as we are to the 2 output. So we would think less about the output as being left and right, more as 1 and 2, and I hope that makes sense. Or they could be full stereo paths where we would think of, USB 1 as being the left side and USB 2 as being the right side. But I'm going to show you a bunch of examples that will hopefully make what I just said clear. Now, the thing about this is we could set this to multi. I don't want to do that today because I just want to be very definitive about what we have feeding into our Helix path. But one thing we can do is we could go down to something like return 1 and 2, and we could use that as a stereo input. Set it as a line input for return 1 and 2 and plug, let's say, a keyboard into it. That is already a stereo signal so that we can send a full stereo path in here. Return 1 would be accepting the left side, return 2 would be accepting the right side, and then we could process that path however we want. So the thing about it is we can send a stereo input into one of these paths as well. Now, obviously, we're going to be talking about guitar because that's my instrument of choice and what my channel is mostly geared towards, and most viewers watching, I'm guessing, are guitar players. So we're going to start with the guitar input, which means this is a mono input. A guitar is a mono signal. We're sending one mono signal into a potentially stereo path. Now, let's say we add an amp block to that. Well, this amp block is simply another mono signal. There is nothing stereo about this amp block. So really, if we're sending this mono signal into this mono block, and let's say we had this cab block turned off, and we send this out, both USB 1 and 2 are going to get the same signal. There isn't going to be anything different about what one side gets. So really what we're getting is just a dual mono signal, and it really no point in recording that in stereo unless we want to, I guess. But there isn't going to give us any benefit to doing that. Now, as soon as we add another element to it, and you'll notice here I have a dual cab. So now we have the potential for stereo. So these new dual cabs that we have with firmware 3.5 have a pan control on them. So if I center both of these off right to the middle, what that means is that we've essentially created another mono block, even though it has the potential for stereo. So just because we might think of this as a stereo block, unless we do something to make it stereo, it isn't going to actually give us anything stereo. So notice here I have a 57 dynamic blended with a 4038 ribbon mic. Both would go to both 1 and 2 or left and right evenly. Again, nothing stereo about this, it's just mono, but we could blend the two different sounds of these mics. Now, how could we turn this into stereo? Well, quite simply, we could pan one mic to the left and one mic to the right. Now we have let's call it stereoization of this preset. So we could take this mono guitar signal into the mono amp into this dual cab, and now we've split it out. So any stereo capable blocks are going to have to be thought of having two outputs. We see this one path on our Helix, and we tend to think that there's only one thing happening, but this actually has two outputs. Now, if I come over here and do something like this and add a mono gain block after it, all that's going to do is take what I did to stereoize this and sum it right back to mono. So this would kill it all unless I turn that into a stereo gain block. So you might think no difference between a stereo gain or a mono gain block. Look, there's no difference in the controls, but there is a huge difference because this has a single input and a single output. For the mono version, when we change it to stereo, this block now has, whether we can see it or not, has two inputs and two outputs. So it's going to retain whatever stereoization, I hate to keep using that word, but I think you know what I mean, that we created. So very, very important. And I had a lot of people contact me and say, wow, I did not know that. I actually thought I was playing in stereo sometimes and I wasn't because I was using mono blocks. So we have to be very careful not to create a preset that has some beautiful stereo elements to it and then destroy that by slapping a mono block after the blocks that are creating this stereo effect and just summing it all to mono. So right now we could do a number of things. We could say, well, we have a stereo preset here. This is great. We're going to have one mic on the right, one mic on the left. Just grab my guitar there. So what we can do is come back over to Cubase now and say, well, you know, this is going out USB 1.2. So I can ARM USB 1.2 stereo track. And what you'll notice if I play that and record a little bit, we now go listen back to our stereo track that we have here. Notice one of the sides is louder than the other. Just let that loop. What you'll notice is on one side, we have the sound of the ribbon mic. On the right side here, as we've told it, we have the SM57. Much brighter sound. Much darker and lower in volume sound for our ribbon mic. So very interesting stuff. So basically, I was able to send this to a stereo track. Now, the problem is, what if we wanted to have more adjustment over all of this after the fact? Well, what if we were to do this? What if we were to keep this exactly the same, knowing that, you know, the right side is going to be our SM57 and our 4038 ribbon is going to be on the left side? What if I don't want to commit it to a stereo track? Well, we can think of this more then as a dual mono. This was a stereo track. So I'm going to get rid of this here. And I am going to actually come up and ARM USB 1 and 2. So now we have these. Same sort of idea, but now we have them going to separate tracks. We know that number one is left. So this 4038 ribbon is going to go to my USB 1 and be recorded on this track by itself. And the SM57 will go onto the USB 2 and be recorded on this track by itself. So let's do a little bit of recording of that. And also, if I come down and engage Guitar DI, which is my USB 7, I don't know if you remember me doing this over here in my audio connections, but down here, guitar reamp is just the DI'd guitar that's not going to have any processing done to it if I wanted to reamp later. So let's just throw that in the mix too, and we'll record this, a little bit of riffing here. Okay, so we have an annoying little riff there that I came up with, and we'll just get this so it loops through. What you'll notice is we have the guitar DI if we need it. I'm going to mute that. I don't want to hear it. So now what I have, a mono version of our ribbon mic and a mono version of our SM57. So I could combine both of these and hand them like I had them before, compensate for the volume difference, or blend them in different ways after the fact. So very interesting. I could take this as a stereo path, or I could take this as a dual mono path. Or if I didn't want any of that and I just wanted a single mono cab where I went to just a single cab as such, now this is just a mono path. 1 and 2 are going to have the same information on them. So I could record that as a stereo track down here in USB 1, 2. Both left and right sides are going to be the same information. Or I could choose to just record it onto a mono path and just use either 1 or 2, and I'm going to get the same outcome. But let's go back to our stereo track that we just had a moment ago. So I hope that's clear so far. So this was basically utilizing it as a dual mono path, utilizing this as USB 1 and 2 rather than, let's say, left and right, which is still 1 and 2, but we just want to refer to it as left and right if we were thinking stereo. Now, what happens if we come along here and we bring in something like a delay? Now, obviously, if I come in here and throw a mono delay on this, what's going to happen is it's going to destroy any stereo effect that I had. So we have to be careful not to take something that we have purposely made stereo and then reduce it to mono. And I keep saying this, but I think it's really important. I've had a lot of people contact me saying that that was a very helpful tip for them. So if we do bring this to stereo though, just because we have a stereo delay doesn't necessarily mean that it is actually in stereo. So if we come over here and we change our scale, bring our spread up, and I'm going to come over to Cubase here and I'm going to actually utilize my USB 1, 2 again, just so that we get the stereo spread. What you'll hear now is a definitive stereoization of this sound. We have this delay bouncing back and forth, but if I take that scale up to 100% and that spread down to 0, this is essentially reduced down to a mono delay. There's going to be no difference between this and having a mono delay up there. So there isn't going to be any difference in sound between having these settings on a stereo delay versus a mono delay. But what it will do is if we wanted to use this as a dual mono path, where we're sending that left signal and right signal out of the cab, we need to have a stereo effect after it to have two inputs. So this delay has a left and a right input and a left and a right output, whereas the mono version does not. So this is now taking the left side into here from whatever we assigned it to out of the cab and the right side and processing that possibly differently. If I was to bring that scale down and that spread up with lots of wow and flutter, the delay is going to process each side of this different. Now that's fine if we're trying to just create a stereo preset with lots of stereoization to it. But if we just wanted to record this as dual mono with the delay on it, we would have to be more careful. We would probably want to bring our spread down and our scale up and just get maybe this sound here, so that now if I was to come back over and record the dual mono outputs of this, now what we'll notice is, because we still have our cabs panned left and right, each of these here Will be processed separately. They'll get the same basic delay, but we'll have the color of the two different mics, which we can then blend after the fact. So it's a little tricky when we start adding effects in, because you really have to think this through, that you're not maybe sending the different part of the stereo effect to each side if we're thinking in dual mono. So we'd have to really think that through. But again, I hope that that's clear. So always think that when we have a mono block of any sort, it's got one input and one output. When we have a stereo block, it's going to be like having two inputs and two outputs. But really thinking of a block as being stereo or mono and having these dual inputs and dual outputs is going to be extremely important. Now, we could come over here and route this to 3 and 4. Now, if I arm these two tracks, they're not going to have anything recorded to them, and we aren't going to hear anything from them if we do try. Right? But if we come down here and arm USB 3 and 4, right, now they're going to be routed there. And it's much the same way. However we want to use this is really up to us. But now you can see the 3 and 4 tracks have that recorded to them, and we still have our guitar DI down there recording as well. Now, how does this work outside of a computer? Let's say we're playing live. Well, we can do the same sort of thing with our 1/4-inch outputs, our XLR outputs, our sends. So if we had XLR outputs, this is a stereo out with a left and a right. All of the things I just told you apply to that. If we wanted to give our front of house engineer, for instance, two different cab sounds to blend at the board for whatever worked best for him, we could simply take a dual cab, pan one left, pan the other right, have that go out to XLR. We may not be running live in stereo, and we don't have any need for a stereo signal, so we'll use it as a dual mono signal if set up correctly, as I explained before. So the left side of this, or our SM57, will go out the left XLR, and he could send that to one mono channel on the board, and then he could have, in this case, the 4038 going out the right XLR. So we're sending him a dual mono signal rather than a stereo signal. So just because we have these pan controls and the ability to, like I said, stereoize this, does not mean it has to be used in stereo. It can be used in mono, it can be used in dual mono, or it could in fact be used in stereo. It's really going to be up to us, but I think a lot of folks just don't really understand how this routing works, and therefore they don't really know what the Helix is capable of, and maybe could be missing out on something that could be very useful to them. And again, there's going to be folks who go, I don't need any of this stuff. I'm just going to use it as I've always used it. And that's fine too. But it's always nice to know when we have a piece of gear that is as complex as the Helix, it's nice to know what it's capable of so that we can utilize that if the need be. All right, so I hope that that was helpful. I know I get tons of questions about the paths and the fact that we have this one straight line. Sometimes in our minds, we just go, oh, this is just a mono signal. But no, it is not. It can be much more complex than that by using mono blocks, stereo blocks, using them as, like I said, either stereo or dual mono. And there's a lot of possibilities. So this was more just designed to open our eyes to maybe more creative ways we could use the Helix for something that maybe we've been trying to accomplish that we didn't know was possible. So I hope it at least did that and nudge us in the right direction to at least experiment and explore and hopefully come up with some new options for us to create some great tones. So I hope that that was helpful. Please like the video, share it with anybody who you think would get some use or enjoyment out of watching it. And also please subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out. I'll be back really soon with some more. Thank you guys again so much for tuning in. Ciao for now.